Karoline Leavitt strode into the debate expecting to crush her rival, as she always did, with sharp words and sharper smirks. But Jasmine Crockett had a secret that would shatter Leavitt's carefully built image, leaving her exposed before a stunned nation. It unfolded just before 9 in the morning, in a cramped television studio in Richmond, Virginia, where the air crackled with hostility. The panel was a pressure cooker. 5 people crammed at a small table, microphones hot, cameras catching every twitch. Leavitt, a former press secretary turned political commentator, had spent years clawing her way to the top, her ambition matched only by her disdain for anyone who dared challenge her. Crockett, a congresswoman from Texas, was her favorite target, a rival whose rising star threatened Leavitt's spotlight. Their professional rivalry was no secret, fueled by years of clashing on policy panels, where Leavitt's barbed insults met Crockett's steady resolve. Today, though, something felt different. The producer, pacing behind a glass wall, sensed it too, muttering to an assistant that the room felt like a storm about to break. Leavitt launched into the debate with her usual venom, cutting off the moderator to dominate the discussion on healthcare reform. Her voice was loud, her gestures sharp, as she dismissed Crockett's proposals as naive. "Congresswoman Crockett thinks she can fix everything with good intentions," Leavitt sneered, leaning forward, her eyes glinting with malice. "But this isn't a charity bake sale, it's the real world." The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the personal edge to her attack. Crockett sat still, her hands folded, her face unreadable. She didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice, but her calm was unsettling, like a coiled spring. Leavitt, emboldened, kept going, piling on insults, calling Crockett's ideas reckless and out of touch. The moderator, a veteran journalist named Paul Grayson, tried to steer back to policy, but Leavitt ignored him, her words dripping with condescension. Then Grayson turned to Crockett. "Congresswoman, care to respond to Ms. Leavitt's critique?" The room went quiet. Leavitt smirked, expecting a flustered retort she could pounce on. Crockett looked straight at her, eyes steady, and said, "I'll respond, but first, let's talk about why Karoline's so eager to tear me down." The panel froze. Crockett reached for a thin folder on the table, one she'd brought unnoticed. She pulled out a single document, holding it up for a moment before sliding it to Grayson. "This," she said, her voice calm but cutting, "is a record of Karoline's private consulting work. It shows she's been paid to sabotage her rivals, including me, not with facts, but with lies." Leavitt's smirk vanished. Her face paled as she stared at the paper. The document, Crockett explained, detailed payments from a shadowy lobbying firm to Leavitt, with instructions to discredit specific politicians, especially women who challenged the status quo. "It's not about policy," Crockett said. "It's about keeping people like me out of the room." Leavitt's voice exploded. "That's a lie!" she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "You're making this up to smear me." Her eyes darted to Grayson, then to the producers, as if begging for rescue. Crockett didn't flinch. "It's real, Karoline," she said. "Signed contracts, bank transfers, even emails where you promised results." Leavitt stood, her chair scraping loudly, then sat again, her hands shaking. "You're desperate," she spat. "You can't win on ideas, so you fake documents." But her voice cracked, betraying her panic. Grayson, holding the paper, looked uneasy, his fingers tightening on the edges. The other panelists exchanged glances, sensing the debate was no longer about health care. Crockett leaned back, her expression unchanged. "If it's fake," she said, "explain why your name's on it. Explain why your bank account's tied to it." Leavitt's mouth opened, but no words came. The studio felt smaller, the air thicker, as the weight of Crockett's words settled over everyone. The confrontation was only beginning, but already the room was electric with shock. Leavitt's polished facade was cracking, and Crockett's quiet strength was rewriting the rules of the fight. What no one knew yet was how deep this rivalry ran, or what Crockett had uncovered in the days leading up to this moment. The truth was about to burn brighter than Leavitt's lies, and the nation was watching. The studio buzzed with raw tension as Karoline Leavitt's shout echoed off the walls, her accusation of lies hanging unanswered. Jasmine Crockett sat steady, her gaze locked on Leavitt, who was unraveling before the cameras. The document, now in the moderator Paul Grayson's hands, was a live wire, its words scorching Leavitt's reputation. Grayson cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Let's keep this civil," he said, but his voice wavered, betraying his unease. Leavitt ignored him, leaning across the table, her face inches from Crockett's. "You think you can ruin me with this?" she hissed, her words venomous. "You're nothing but a cheap opportunist, Jasmine, grasping at straws." Crockett's lips curved slightly, not a smile but a signal she was unmoved. "I'm not the one grasping, Karoline," she said, her tone even. "I'm just holding up a mirror." Leavitt's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white. She turned to the other panelists, two older men who'd stayed silent, their faces tight with discomfort. "You believe this nonsense?" she demanded, her voice rising. "She's playing you all, faking evidence to look like a victim." One panelist shifted in his seat, avoiding her gaze, while the other mumbled something about reviewing the document. Leavitt's eyes flashed with fury, realizing she was losing the room. She whipped back to Crockett. "You've always been jealous," she spat. "Ever since that healthcare conference in Atlanta. You couldn't stand me outshining you." The jab was personal, a nod to their rivalry's roots 3 years ago, when Leavitt had publicly humiliated Crockett by interrupting her keynote speech with pointed questions, earning applause from a conservative crowd. That moment had cemented their feud, with Leavitt relishing every chance to undermine Crockett's credibility. Crockett didn't take the bait. She opened her folder again, pulling out a second sheet, this one a printed email chain. "Let's talk about Atlanta," she said, her voice cutting through Leavitt's rant. "This is an email you sent to that lobbying firm a week before the conference. You asked for talking points to, quote, neutralize Crockett's influence." She handed the paper to Grayson, who scanned it, his brow furrowing deeper. The email listed specific phrases to paint Crockett as unprepared and overly idealistic, tactics Leavitt had used to devastating effect. "You didn't just interrupt me that day," Crockett said. "You planned it, paid for it, and built your brand on it." The studio went silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Even the crew, usually detached, exchanged stunned glances. Leavitt's face twisted with rage. "You're pathetic," she shouted, standing again, her chair wobbling behind her. "Digging up old emails to twist history. I earned that stage, unlike you, who just rides sympathy." Her voice cracked, desperation creeping in. She pointed at Grayson. "Why are you letting her do this? This isn't a debate, it's a witch hunt." Grayson, flustered, started to respond, but Crockett cut in, her voice still calm but now laced with steel. "If it's a witch hunt, Karoline, why do your own words keep burning you?" Leavitt froze, her breath ragged, as if realizing she'd been outmaneuvered. The cameras caught every second, her flushed cheeks, her trembling hands, a portrait of a woman losing control. The confrontation was spiraling, but its roots ran deeper than this studio. 4 days earlier, Crockett had sat in a quiet diner in Dallas, across from a former colleague, Maria Holt, who'd once worked with Leavitt's consulting firm. Over coffee, Maria had slipped Crockett a USB drive, her hands shaking. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," Maria whispered. "Karoline's been targeting you for years, Jasmine. It's not just politics, it's personal." The drive contained the documents now on the table, evidence of Leavitt's campaign to discredit Crockett and others through paid smear tactics. Crockett had spent nights verifying every detail, knowing Leavitt would call it fake. She'd prepared for this moment not with anger, but with precision, determined to expose the truth without losing herself to Leavitt's chaos. As the debate teetered on collapse, Grayson clutched the email, his voice shaky. "We'll need to verify this," he said, but Leavitt wasn't listening. She leaned toward Crockett, her voice low and vicious. "You'll regret this," she said. "You think you're clever, but you're out of your league." Crockett met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said. The words landed like a slap, and Leavitt's composure shattered further, her next move unpredictable as the cameras kept rolling. Karoline Leavitt's threat hung in the air, her words a low growl. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink, her calm a stark contrast to the storm brewing across the table. The Richmond studio was a pressure cooker, the cameras capturing every bead of sweat on Leavitt's forehead. Moderator Paul Grayson clutched the incriminating email, his hands unsteady as he stammered, "We need to move on to the next topic." But Leavitt wasn't done. She shoved her chair back, standing fully this time, her voice shrill. "You're a fraud, Jasmine," she shouted, pointing a trembling finger. "You think you can drag my name through the mud with your fake papers? I've worked too hard for this." Her eyes were wild, her carefully rehearsed poise gone, replaced by raw fury. The crew froze, one cameraman adjusting his lens to catch the meltdown. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice steady as granite. "You worked hard at lying, Karoline. That's what those papers show." She tapped her folder, its contents a silent threat. "Want me to keep going?" Leavitt's face twisted, caught between rage and panic. She turned to the audience, her arms wide. "She's manipulating you all," she cried. "This is what she does, plays the saint while stabbing people in the back." The accusation landed flat, the audience murmuring, some shaking their heads. Crockett's restraint was winning them over, her silence louder than Leavitt's screams. Grayson tried again to intervene. "Ms. Leavitt, please sit down." But she ignored him, pacing a tight circle, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Crockett opened her folder once more, pulling out a third document, this one thicker, stapled at the corner. "Since you're bringing up hard work," she said, her tone cool but pointed, "let's talk about your contract with that lobbying firm." She slid the packet to Grayson, who fumbled it, nearly dropping the email still in his hand. "It's a 3-year deal," Crockett continued. "Signed by you, Karoline, to target 5 women in Congress, including me. The goal? Ruin our reputations by painting us as unstable, unfit for leadership. It's all there. Dates, payments, even your handwritten notes in the margins." Grayson's eyes widened as he skimmed the pages, his face pale. The other panelists, silent until now, leaned forward, one whispering to the other. "Is that real?" Leavitt stopped pacing, her breath ragged. "You're disgusting," she spat, her voice breaking. "Fabricating stories to make me look like a monster. I never signed anything like that." But her denial sounded hollow, her eyes darting to the document as if it might bite. Crockett tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. "Then why's your signature on page 4? She asked. "Why's your handwriting saying, 'Push Crockett harder, she'll crack'?" The room gasped, the words a gut punch. Leavitt's knees buckled slightly and she gripped the table for support. "You're setting me up," she whispered. But the fight was draining from her. The cameras zoomed in, catching the tremble in her jaw. The roots of this moment stretched back weeks to a late-night phone call Crockett received from an anonymous source, a whistleblower who'd worked for Leavitt's firm. The source, a young woman named Clara, had mailed Crockett a package with copies of contracts, emails, and notes, all detailing Leavitt's vendetta. Clara's voice had shaken as she explained, "Karoline laughed about ruining you. She said you were too soft to fight back." Crockett hadn't slept that night, poring over the evidence, her anger tempered by resolve. She'd verified every page through a trusted lawyer, knowing Leavitt would try to dodge the truth. This debate was her chance to expose not just Leavitt, but a system that rewarded such tactics. Leavitt's voice rose again, desperate now. "You're twisting everything?" she yelled, lunging toward Grayson, trying to snatch the document. He pulled it back, startled, as a producer signaled to keep rolling. "Give me that," Leavitt demanded, her composure shattered. Crockett watched, unmoved. "You can't grab the truth away, Karoline," she said. "It's out now." Leavitt's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of rage, as she realized the audience, the cameras, the nation were seeing her for what she was. The debate was no longer about health care or policy. It was about a woman who'd built her career on deceit, and another who'd come to tear it down. Karoline Leavitt's tears glistened under the studio's harsh glare, but they did nothing to soften the fury twisting her face. She stood frozen, gripping the table as Jasmine Crockett's words echoed. The truth was out. The Richmond debate had become a battlefield, and Leavitt was losing ground fast. Moderator Paul Grayson, still clutching the damning contract, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "We need to take a break," he said, his voice barely audible, but the producers, sensing a ratings goldmine, signaled to keep the cameras rolling. Leavitt's head snapped toward Grayson. "You're letting her destroy me!" she shrieked, her voice raw. "Do your job and stop this!" Grayson flinched, but Crockett, seated calmly, spoke before he could. "You destroyed yourself, Karoline," she said, her tone sharp yet controlled. "All I did was show the receipts." Leavitt's chest heaved as she turned on Crockett, her words spilling out like venom. "You smug little nobody," she spat. "You think you're better than me? I've fought for every inch of my career while you coast on pity." The insult was a desperate swing, but it landed weak, the audience murmuring disapproval. Crockett's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with resolve. She reached into her folder one last time, producing a small folded note. "You want to talk about fighting?" she said, unfolding it carefully. "This is a memo you wrote to your firm, Karoline, after our Atlanta clash. It says you targeted me because I was, quote, a threat to your brand." She passed it to Grayson, who took it like it was burning. "You didn't fight fair," Crockett continued. "You fought dirty, and you thought I'd stay quiet." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Leavitt's face crumpled, her hands shaking as she pointed at Crockett. "You're obsessed with me," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You've been waiting to ruin me since we met." The accusation was absurd, and even the panelists, usually neutral, exchanged skeptical glances. Crockett leaned back, her posture relaxed, but her words cutting. "I'm not obsessed, Karoline. I'm prepared. There's a difference." The line stung, and Leavitt staggered back, as if physically struck. She looked to the crew, the audience, anyone for support, but found none. Her carefully built image was shattering, piece by piece, under Crockett's relentless truth. The moment's wait traced back to a quiet morning in Crockett's office, 2 weeks before the debate. She'd met with her aide, Thomas Reed, a sharp researcher who'd spent days cross-referencing Leavitt's documents. Thomas had laid out the memo, the contract, the emails, his voice low. "She's been at this for years, Jasmine," he said. "Not just you, but others. It's a playbook to keep women like you down." Crockett had nodded, her jaw tight, not from fear but from clarity. She'd decided then to face Leavitt head-on, not with shouts but with evidence. Knowing the truth would hit harder than any insult. She'd rehearsed her delivery, not to perform, but to ensure her voice stayed steady when the moment came. Leavitt's voice broke the silence, now a hoarse whisper. "You'll pay for this," she said, glaring at Crockett. "You think you've won, but I'll bury you." The threat was empty, her energy spent, but it drew gasps from the audience. Grayson finally found his voice. "That's enough, Ms. Leavitt," he said, standing. But Crockett waved him off, her gaze locked on Leavitt. "You can't bury the truth," she said. "And you can't bury me." The words were quiet, final, like a door slamming shut. Leavitt sank into her chair, her hands covering her face, as if she could hide from the cameras, the audience, the world. The crew exchanged stunned looks, one whispering to another, "This is historic." The debate was over, not because Grayson called it, but because Crockett had stripped Leavitt. Barre! The audience sat riveted, some nodding, others whispering, as the reality sank in. Leavitt's career was crumbling, and Crockett's strength was rewriting the narrative. But the story wasn't just about this moment. It was about what came next, how one woman's courage could shift the way a nation saw power, ambition, and truth. Karoline Leavitt slumped in her chair, hands shielding her face, as if she could block out the weight of Jasmine Crockett's words. The Richmond studio was silent, save for the faint hum of cameras still rolling, capturing every second of Leavitt's defeat. Moderator Paul Grayson stood frozen, the memo and contract clutched in his hands, his authority dwarfed by the moment. The audience, once restless, now sat rapt, some leaning forward, others wiping their eyes, moved by Crockett's unyielding strength. Leavitt's threats had fizzled, her venom spent, leaving only a woman exposed as a fraud. Crockett, her folder now closed, sat with quiet dignity, her gaze steady, not on Leavitt, but on the future she'd just reshaped. Grayson finally spoke, his voice shaky. "We're out of time," he said, but no one moved. Leavitt's hands dropped, revealing red-rimmed eyes and a scowl. "You haven't won," she whispered, barely audible, but the microphones caught it. Crockett tilted her head, her voice soft but piercing. "This isn't about winning, Karoline. It's about honesty." The words landed like a final verdict, and Leavitt's shoulders sagged, her fight gone. The crew, usually bustling at a segment's end, stood still, one wiping her glasses, another nodding slowly as if witnessing history. The audience broke into scattered applause, not loud but heartfelt, a tribute to Crockett's courage. The moment's impact stretched beyond the studio. Hours later, in a small community center in Norfolk, Virginia, Crockett spoke to a crowd of retirees and local organizers. She stood at a simple podium, her navy folder tucked under her arm, her voice warm but firm. "I didn't go on that stage to fight," she said. "I went to show what happens when we stop letting lies define us." An older man in the front row, his hands calloused from years as a factory worker, raised a question. "How do you keep going when they attack you like that?" Crockett paused, her eyes softening. "You remember who you're fighting for," she said. "Not just yourself, but everyone who's been told they don't belong." The room erupted in cheers, the sound carrying to the street outside. Leavitt, meanwhile, vanished from the public eye. By evening, her consulting firm issued a vague statement, denying knowledge of the contracts, but it was too late. A retired journalist, Ellen Parks, who'd watched the debate from her home in Roanoke, mailed Crockett a handwritten letter. "I've seen too many women torn down like Karoline tried to do," she wrote. "You showed my generation what standing tall looks like." Crockett kept the letter on her desk, a reminder of why she'd faced Leavitt's venom without flinching. The whistleblower, Clara, who'd sent the documents, later met Crockett privately, her voice steady now. "I was scared," Clara admitted, "but you made it worth it." Crockett hugged her, whispering, "You made it possible." Back in the studio, as the cameras finally cut, Crockett stood, smoothing her jacket, and walked past Leavitt without a glance. Leavitt remained seated, staring at the table, her career in ruins. The producers, scrambling to process the footage, knew they'd captured something bigger than a debate. By morning, the clip was on every news channel, not for Leavitt's outburst, but for Crockett's quiet power. In diners, offices, and living rooms, people talked about the congresswoman who'd exposed a system built on deceit, not with shouts, but with truth. Crockett didn't chase the spotlight. Days later, at a town hall in Houston, she answered a young woman's question about facing bullies. "You don't need to be louder than them," Crockett said, her voice steady. "You need to be clearer. Let the truth do the talking." The crowd rose, clapping, some in tears, not for a spectacle, but for a shift they could feel. Leavitt's name faded from headlines, her tactics a cautionary tale, while Crockett's resolve became a beacon. The debate had ended, but its message endured. Truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. If this story moved you, if it made you think about standing up to lies, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, talk about it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that cut through the noise and get to the heart of what matters.